Ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining today's Case Manager Site Manager Descriptions. Please note that all lines will be muted until the Q&A portion of the call. We will provide you with instructions on how to ask a question at that time. You are welcome to submit written questions during the presentation, and these will be addressed during Q&A. To submit a written question, use the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen and choose All Panelists from the Send To drop-down menu. If you require technical assistance, please send a note to the event producer. With that, I'll turn the call over to Liz Clark. Liz, please go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Liz Clark with Professional Development Services, and I'd also like to welcome you to the Case Manager Site Manager Position Description webinar. So we have 4 speakers for today's webinar, and I'd like you to introduce them to you now. Dr. Royce Wilson is a District 4 Veterinary Medical Officer with Surveillance Preparedness and Response Services and the Green Incident Management Operations Section Chief. Dr. Nicki Humphrey serves as the Emergency Preparedness and Response Veterinary Medical Officer on the Sheep, Goat, Cervid, and Equine Health Team. Dr. Humphrey also served as the case manager for the 2017 Tennessee HPAI outbreak and the 2016 Tennessee Equine Piroplasmosis outbreak. Sherry Healey is a Cooperative Agreement Specialist Administrative Officer for District 5 and the Field Indemnity Specialist for all 50 states with USDA APHIS, Vet Services, Surveillance Preparedness and Response Services. And Kimberly Gish is a Program Assistant with Missouri District 4 Field Office and an APHIS Safety Officer. She serves as the Secretary for the District 4 Health and Safety Committee and is a fit tester for the APHIS Respiratory Protection Program. And I'll now pass the webinar over to Dr. Royce Wilson.
Good morning, all. Glad you could get on the webinar today. The purpose of the webinar was kind of described in the title, is to better describe the position descriptions for the case manager, site manager, and also to show where they fit into the organization chart. For instance, who do they report to? And we'll also be describing the role of the Field Reimbursement Specialist and how they may interact, especially with the case managers at an incident. This particular PowerPoint is a presentation that was given at the last case manager training, and it's been modified to some degree to address some of the confusion that was surrounding the case manager and site manager positions. Primarily what we want to do is kind of go over the 3 different lanes that these 3 positions cover when we're on an incident. First, we'll start off with the case manager position, and we'll show kind of in the organizational chart, the site managers over on the left actually are within the disease support branch in the operations structure, and case managers are in the disease management branch. So they have separate lines of communication and supervision within the organizational chart. Case managers, the position description is right here. The position reports to the operations section chief or the disease management branch director if one's appointed, and they serve as the interface and single point of contact with the owner or the producer of a single or possibly multiple infected premises. The job responsibilities are to monitor and report the processes for the infected premises from the time of known infection until the quarantine is released. And here you can also see the training requirements, experience that we would like for them to have, and then other credentials that might apply. Basically, the case manager is the producer liaison, and ideally we would have one case manager assign no more than 5 prems. Primarily what they're going to do is establish a relationship with that producer, and if they're the first person on site, which often they might be, they might also pick up some of the roles of site manager as well by doing site evaluation and setup with environmental and biosecurity in mind. They also would possibly carry the flock plan and get it signed by the producer, and also the EPI investigation as well. This position does report to the operations section chief or the deputy or their disease management branch. and they would facilitate communication between the incident management team and the producer. They also would coordinate depopulation and disposal with the producer and the euthanasia and disposal team lead, with documentation of all activities that go on the property with a daily 214. If there's a site manager assigned to that premises as well, then they would have a relationship with that site manager and also the Field Reimbursement Specialist, which take care of the financial matters that would be addressing 123s and reimbursement of equipment, stuff like that. They would also convey options for virus elimination protocols, the cleaning and disinfection, and they might also be involved in the environmental sampling as the prem gets close to being eligible for restocking. At this point, I would like to have Dr. Nicki Humphrey give us a brief rundown of her experience as a case manager during the Tennessee 2017 outbreak.
So good morning. I'm Nicki Humphrey. I'm hoping you can all hear me. I served as the case manager for the High Pass premises in the 2017 Tennessee outbreak. And since Royce already pretty much gave you a pretty good overview of what the case manager does, one thing I wanted to mention was in terms of your daily reports or the 214s, if you serve as a case manager, those documents need to be really accurate and detailed because this is where information comes from for further reporting purposes. For example, all of the situation reports that you might have read during the outbreak. So my goal today was just to go through quickly what each day looked like from start to the end of disposal on the first premise, and then just give you some differences in terms of how I dealt with the second premise because it was the same company involved. So I'm sorry, can you hear me all right? So the first day, okay, thanks. The first day, I learned that there was a foreign animal disease investigation taking place on a poultry operation mid-morning, which was on a Friday, March 3rd. And the information I received came from our emergency coordinator for Tennessee, who is also the Tennessee IMT operations section chief. I had about 3 hours to gather all of the information and documents needed in order to serve as the case manager for this first premise. I think later that afternoon we set up the IMT for the state and had a national call around 5 p.m. Following that call, I was able to get the contact information for the live production manager for the company that was involved, and he and I had a fairly long conversation just as soon as that national call ended. During that call, we discussed the documents that he would need to submit. Those included mortality and inventory records for all barns that were involved, as well as the appraisal and indemnity request forms for both the grower and the bird company, the owner of the birds. At that time, I also talked to him about signing up for a DUNS number and registering for the system for award management, as those systems are important in order for them to receive their indemnity payment. As a case manager, I was responsible for creating a premise map with labels for the incident management team. Those labels included the bird inventory by barn numbers, bodies of water that were located on or close to the premises, as well as the location of the mortality shed and entry and exit points to the premise. That work pretty much took us until almost midnight that night, and then we met first thing the next morning at a hotel conference room. It was about 30 minutes from the affected premise. I met with the live production manager, the complex manager, the Depop team for the company that was involved, as well as our Veterinary Services Depop group supervisor. And we discussed the Depop plan for the day and got the appraisal and indemnity request signed by the company that owned the birds. We arrived on the infected premise mid-morning. As the case manager, I stayed on the clean side in the beginning and started talking with the grower about how the process was going to work, obtained their signature for the appraisal and indemnity request, and also went through the DUNS and the STAM process with them as well. And then I also sent all of this information to the grower in an email just because I could already tell that they were pretty overwhelmed by the amount of information they were receiving. I provided regular updates throughout the day to the ops chief at the incident command post, and most of those updates had to go via text message just because we had pretty poor cell service. But when communicating with the ops chief, you're probably either going to be doing it via text message or phone conversation, maybe even email. I was communicating constantly throughout the day with the live production manager because he was updating me on their company depop status as they were doing half the barns. And then I was also talking pretty frequently with the VS depop group supervisor who was overseeing the contractor crews because they were doing the other half of the barns. There were a couple of times where I had to go ahead and put on PPE and go into the hot zone just because, as I mentioned earlier, the cell service was pretty terrible, and I wasn't able to reach the depop group supervisor. On this particular site, I served as the case manager, the site manager also in the beginning, so I was monitoring the C&D line setup as well as overseeing biosecurity. As time permitted, that first day on site, I was working on flock plan modifications with the assistant from the program assistant at the incident command post because, as I said, I didn't have good internet access and was unable to download the flock plans as templates from the website. My advice is to download all of the documents in advance and modify the current year, plus familiarize yourself so you can quickly update once you've discussed risks with the company and the grower. The flock plans have to go to the ops chief for review and approval, and then we also sent them to the HPAI ops for review and approval. After that, they went to the state animal health official and the assistant director. Once they're signed by the state animal health official and the assistant director, as the case manager, I then carry it back to the grower and the company for their signature. One thing I'll mention on the flock plans, that timeliness is key, as the indemnity payments are tied to when those get signed. So they can't actually release indemnity payments until they have a signed flock plan. On day 3, on the infected premise, we continued depopulation, and then the contracting crews arrived to begin disposal as well. So I just continued probably every hour or so sending text messages with updates back to the ops chief as to how depop and disposal was going. During that day, I was also in communication with HPAI ops and the bird company owner on finalizing numbers for bird and egg inventories. I'm kind of being told now that's not really going to be a case manager function, probably so much as a field reimbursement specialist. I'm sure they'll get into that later. I worked to complete the initial EPI questionnaire with the grower and company input on the 3rd day. This was a little bit challenging because the growers on both of the infected premises that I was in charge of had to do significant work in terms of helping with depop and disposal by moving slats and other equipment. So you'll just have to find time when it's best for the grower in order to get those questions answered. It may even be best to wait until all of the depop is completed and just let them kind of have some time to just sit and think. After completion of depopulation, I was only on site as needed to verify burial procedures and obtain signatures on 123s as they were completed by HPAI ops, and also to obtain the signature on the flock plan. I think the flock plan took us about 5 days to get a completed document. Once burial was completed, I was only on the premise as needed to verify cleaning and disinfection of barns for the grower. And basically for that one, I only went out after the first barn was cleaned just to verify that it was clean enough to apply disinfectant. It is the case manager's responsibility to do a cleaning and disinfection inspection after all of the barns have been cleaned and disinfected. One of the other jobs that I served in as a case manager was to be a liaison between the epidemiologists who came to and the growers in order to set up additional meetings for longer SIA epidemiology questionnaires. I continued to keep the operations section chief as well as the assistant director and the state animal health official updated on key progress activities. Mostly this was just when cleaning and disinfection was complete for each barn on each affected premise. It was probably a period of about 2 months, I would say, from when we finished burial to when we were able to do virus elimination sampling. So during that time period, I was planning and preparing for that sampling and just keeping the incident management team as well as the lab informed of projected dates of when that sampling might occur, as well as the number of samples that they might expect. For the second premise, that one popped positive, I think it was about 2 weeks into our first site. It was the same company involved, so there wasn't a lot of extra explaining for the company. However, there was some differences between that grower and the first grower. So the second grower liked to communicate more in person and preferred to have a case manager present for almost all meetings. At the same time, the second grower had finally had financial reimbursement training, and so they were deployed towards the end of, I think it was the end of burial for the second grower. So then I just served as a liaison between the financial reimbursement specialist and the grower to set up meetings for them to go ahead and finish their financial process. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Royce.
So as you can see, the roles and responsibilities of case manager are really pivotal for conveying that information back and forth between the grower or the company and the incident management team at the ICP. This role was born out of necessity during our 2015 high-path AI outbreak, primarily used in Minnesota and Iowa. So now we're going to go on to the role of site managers, which also came out of a necessity during the high-path AI in 2015. They are primarily a biosecurity officer for that site. This is a fairly new position description that has been worked up with the other operations section chiefs. It's been modified quite a bit to be more descriptive of what the role really is. This position reports to the operations section chief or the disease support branch, if it's appointed, and is responsible for site evaluation and setup, site biosecurity to ensure proper cleaning and disinfection of equipment and personnel, as well as security and access of an assigned premises or possibly multiple prems. The site manager does have the authority to halt operations on a site in order to ensure that security and biosecurity are maintained. The job responsibilities are to do a site evaluation with environmental and biosecurity considerations, to line up the biosecurity line and set everything up, to also be in charge of badging if we're using it, and to also evaluate security issues. They communicate the personnel needs to the incident command post or the IMT to either the ops chief or the deputy ops chief or branch director, and communicate with the case manager if they're both on site. They need to maintain a presence to control biosecurity at the clean and dirty line and to verify proper cleaning and disinfection of personnel and equipment. And they maintain a relationship and information sharing with the case manager. So they both serve different roles, but they coordinate on-site and communicate regularly. Here's just some photos of some possible scenarios. As you can see on the left photo, there's a paint mark that indicates where the clean-dirty line is. This is where the site manager will primarily be stationed to monitor personnel and equipment coming off of a property to make sure that we're not transferring virus off of the property. Now I'm going to throw it to Kimberly Gish, who is one of our field reimbursement specialists, to kind of explain to us what their role is. Kimberly?
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Hi, I'm Kimberly Gish. I'm a field reimbursement specialist. During the 2015 high-path outbreak, we quickly realized that our normal payment method was going to take too long. There were simply too many premises infected at one time. We didn't have enough people trained to review the number of invoices being submitted for payment. The cost review team was then formed to help review the costs that were being incurred by the producers during the outbreak and set guidelines of what is fair and reasonable to reimburse producers and companies for. There were 4 of us on this team, which included our team lead, Donnie Link, Sherry Healey, Rose Massengale, and myself, all working under the direction of Dr. Patty Fox and the high-path ops team. We reviewed and approved all the financial plans that were submitted by each producer and company. With well over 200 infected prems, this was a very daunting process. After the outbreak was over, Dr. Patty Fox determined that we needed a larger team that was strategically placed throughout the country. This formed the Field Reimbursement Specialist team, working directly under the direction of Dr. Patty Fox. Next slide, please. Dr. Fox, Sherry, and myself held a training in Ames, Iowa in March of 2017 and trained our team of reimbursement specialists. We have approximately 25 specialists ready to deploy at any given moment. And here is a picture of our team. Next slide. This slide shows the representation by district. In District 1, we have 6. In District 2, there are 2. There are 5 in District 3, 4 in District 4, 5 in District 5, and 3 specialists in District 6. Next slide. During our after actions talk, we realized that the biggest complaint by producers was money. They did not know how they were going to get paid, when they were going to get paid, and they always had somebody different talking to them about money, and there was always a different story being told. Our solution to this problem is to only have one point of contact regarding finances, and that is the Field Reimbursement Specialist. We will walk them through every financial step from getting a Sam's and Dunn's number to filling out the financial plan to getting the VS-123 submitted for payment. We will work closely with the case managers and ops chiefs throughout our entire process. Case managers might be asked to help us by getting forms signed, but all the financial questions should be directed to us so that we can maintain consistency. Now I'm going to have Sherry Healey talk to you about her experience as a field reimbursement specialist in the field.
Thank you, Kimberly.
You're welcome.
As Kim mentioned earlier, the feedback that we received from producers and some of the hot wash material we covered on after-action reports is what helped us to reinvent the reimbursement specialist. I want to talk to you a little bit about the evolution. We've streamlined the process after every outbreak. For instance, we realized that the cooperative compliance agreements that were used in 2015 were not the right tool for the job. It took over a year to get all the cases closed. We wanted to be able to do that a lot quicker. Also learned, like Kim said, when it comes to financial paperwork, we need one voice. We need one person that makes a decision on what can be disinfected, what we can pay for, what has to be thrown away. In 2015, out of necessity, we used case managers like that, but we have figured out over the last 3 years of training and working on these processes, trying to hone them down, we need one person making the decisions about the money on any one place. Each one of these reimbursement specialists work directly for Patty Fox. We also answer directly to the ops chief. We aren't going out there on our own undirected. The ops chiefs tell us where we need to go next. It usually works out that we're there a couple of days after the birds are dead and while they're in the process of beginning cleaning. During the HPI outbreak in Indiana 2016, that was our first opportunity to start our new payment processes, but we hadn't trained the reimbursement specialists yet. So we brought back members of the cost review team. I was deployed directly to the field to get the information from the producers, and then I would funnel that back to the team to do the processing back at home. This worked out pretty well. We're proud to say that we paid every dime that we owed, we had paid in 90 days in comparison with over a year on the Indiana outbreak. The last outbreak that we got involved in was in Tennessee. That occurred during our training and that we were putting on in Ames, and after we sent our team home from the training, we deployed 2 specialists from District 2 to assist with the financial processes. In the after-action reports after Tennessee, we realized that we needed a greater clarification between case managers, site managers, and financial reimbursement. So we started working immediately on the case managers' classes and Dr. Wilson gave invaluable input from the ops chiefs. He would take back questions to the ops chief on how they wanted it done, and I think we were able to put together a really good training for the case manager, and I think they plan to do the same with the site manager. The reimbursement specialists are going to stay concentrating on the financial burdens that happen here. The one thing that we wanted to make sure that we made a priority when we were talking to people, not only are we going to tell you what's going to happen throughout this whole process, we're going to tell you when your money, how it's broken down and how it's going to come back to you. And we also discovered that one of the best things we needed to do was give them a bigger voice. They need to be able to tell us what their concerns are. So every financial reimbursement specialist that goes out stays with that person throughout the process. Right now, we're walking them through the financial aspects of an outbreak, but we also are outlining their recovery step by step. We let them know up front that we'll be able to, what we can reimburse them for, when and where they can expect those payments to happen. We are also responsible for working closely with ops and discuss any possible expenditures. For example, it's not uncommon for a premise owner. In 2015, we got hundreds of dollars worth of receipts in road repair. Now the expenditures, if they're determined to be vital with operations, they can be discussed ahead of time and approved with reimbursement specialists, and that will allow for a faster repayment to owners. Dr. Wilson?
So as you can see, all three of these positions are vitally important for helping that producer from the beginning of knowing that they're an infected premises, clear through the restocking process and getting back in business. The case manager is that primary point of contact for passing information. The site manager is primarily responsible for biosecurity while operations are ongoing on that premises, and the field reimbursement specialist assists that producer in getting payments for not only the birds but the equipment and contracting that might go on if they're going to do their own cleaning and disinfecting, and reimbursements for other things like feed and materials that have to be disposed of. So as far as those of you that might be interested in becoming a case manager or a site manager, we'll be having a couple trainings this summer and fall, one case manager training and then a site manager training that will actually give you a level of credentials and put you on a list of available personnel for an outbreak that can be requested by operations. For instance, if operations deems that we need 6 case managers and 3 site managers, your name would be on a list of personnel that we could select from and be deployable during the next incident. With that, I would like to throw it back to Liz, and I believe we can take some questions if there are some.
Yes, we can.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we move to Q&A, please press #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. You will hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please then state your name and question. Once again, pressing #2 will indicate that you wish to ask a question. To submit a written question, use the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen and choose All Panelists from the Send To drop-down menu. Thank you.
We do have a written question coming in. Who does the field reimbursement specialist report to during an FMD outbreak?
It would be handled exactly the same. We're going to report to whoever that section person is, whoever takes care of beef. Patty happens to be poultry, so we go to her. But that will switch over to whomever is in charge. In fact, now. Sometime, I can't remember, Kim, you might, here in the next 6 months or so, we're going to work on one for swine. We're going to try to train folks to deal with the differences between poultry and swine and what kind of costs they're looking at and what to expect. So that's in the works now.
Okay, so we have another question. For smaller non-commercial flocks, is the financial communication still done by the case manager? Are the field reimbursement specialists only implemented in larger incidents?
If there happens to be a field reimbursement specialist in that same state, then we try to send that field reimbursement specialist. It's good for them to practice and keep abreast of any new financial changes, but we don't deploy and go work with a team. Of course, when it's a backyard deal, it usually ends up being somebody in that state. Now, not every state has a field reimbursement specialist, but we're getting them there. We're getting them spread out. They even, I talked to Dr. Harriet at one of these situations, and he thought, you know, if we could use one even from their district, that way we can keep these folks trained and put them on actual live situations.
We would also work virtually with the case manager in order to walk them through every step, because our processes have changed quite a bit since case managers were involved with payment processes.
Okay, do we have any other written questions, verbal questions?
There are currently no questions in the queue. As a reminder, if you'd like to ask a verbal question, please press #2 on your telephone keypad.
We do have a written question coming in. Who determines if the grower and or company have appropriate biosecurity measures in place at the time, I'm sorry, I have this thing that's coming up, at the time of the infectious incursion, which would qualify them to receive indemnification?
I believe they have to sign a biosecurity statement along with their flock plan, and that, I believe, has to be approved through Patty Fox's group. Is that correct, Kimberly and Sherry?
Yes, I believe that goes to the High Path Ops group.
We do have another written question. Who will be processing the DS-1-23s, case manager or field reimbursement officer?
The field reimbursement specialist will.
Okay.
And there are no verbal questions in the queue? We actually just had one question come in. Caller, your line's been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Royce, this is Louis Dodds in North Carolina. Quick question. We had a training, I think it was early FY17 now, for case manager supervisors, which was sort of intended to be a train-the-trainer type training. And so, the task then was to come home and identify and train up potential case managers. You mentioned a case manager training that's coming up, and we've had more since then. Is the preference now, by the ops groups, preferable to have identified folks attend the national trainings, or to still have us identify and train those people locally?
Both, to answer your question. We still would like for those that have gone through the case manager or the site manager training to be in a position where they felt comfortable delivering that knowledge and material at a local level. But we are still going to be having some national trainings just to increase our pool of personnel that would be available to go out and do it, say, at a state, federal, cooperative meeting or something. A lot of the case managers, especially as we get toward the end of an outbreak, we're hoping to have trained assets within the state, because those are the folks that are going to be able to follow those producers for the long haul. Those that are deployed from veterinary services typically are going to be on a 3-week rotation, and we really hope to get some of this training pushed out to the state level folks so that we can utilize their personnel to walk their producers through clear to the end of the outbreak. So yes, it's kind of a combination of train the trainer and then also continuing with the national level to get more personnel kind of trained up to be able to do those.
We had it in mind, especially on case managers, that they would be able to go out and do that. Unfortunately, we have gotten so broke that trying to get a district-wide training, has gotten more and more difficult. That's why we tried really hard to get somebody in each district. We wanted those districts to try to get together. We haven't been able to afford to pull even a 4, 5, 7 state district together for a training.
And there are no additional questions in the queue. As a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please press #2 on your telephone keypad or use the chat panel on the right-hand side of your screen and choose All Panelists. Thank you.
I don't see any additional written questions coming through.
And we just had one verbal question come up. Caller, your line's
okay.
Please go ahead. Caller, please ensure your line is not muted on your end.
Hi, this is Sue Skrupski. Royce, this is a follow-up to a comment that you made about local assets taking on the case manager positions. So as we've defined the site manager, case managers, and reimbursement specialists to kind of follow people from the beginning to the end, I kind of went to my question. Sometimes these processes take longer than 3 weeks. So would these folks that are going there as reimbursement specialists or case managers be expected to stay longer than the 3 weeks initially, or what's the vision on that?
No.
That has been a discussion, but really probably is not something that's going to happen with veterinary services personnel, unless they're a local veterinary services person. If they're deployed from another district or another state, those are probably going to end up being continue a 3-week rotation with a day or 2 overlap to introduce the new case manager to that producer. We did that with some level of success when we first started utilizing case managers in Minnesota and Iowa. And as we kind of wound down in Minnesota, we transferred a lot of that case management work over to the state employees. And once we kind of got them, introduced to that role, they did a great job in following that all the way through until those farms got restocked. So I think primarily, it's going to be a 3-week rotation if it's deployed assets, if it's local folks, whether they're VS or state employees. Yes, we could utilize those personnel for a longer period of time.
Yeah, financial reimbursement. I'm sorry?
Go ahead.
Financial reimbursement. We're going to stay with them. I think when by the time we leave, Kim, don't we usually have all of the money stuff is pretty much taken care of, except for their last few payments. Those will still be sent in to us, and we finish those out.
Yes, Sherry, that's correct. So some of our work might be done with the producer over the phone or through emails, and we may ask, the case manager to go get, the VS-123 signed, but we will be the ones putting it together and processing it.
Okay, so like the reimbursement specialist, you might be on site and get assigned to that person and talk to them initially, and then the follow-up will be probably by phone or emails. But on site manager and case managers, it'll probably be more similar to what's been in the past, where there's somebody there for 3 weeks, and then it'll get handed off to somebody else for the next rotation unless they happen to get assigned to a local person. Is that kind of how you're visioning it all?
Yes, that's correct. Yep. The field reimbursement specialist will be the only one to stay with that person start to finish unless it's local.
Okay, all right. And then the other question, also to the previous question about the case manager supervisors who came back and did training with state or federal folks locally, you mentioned that when you have the case manager trainings that you want to have kind of a list of people who would be available to be case managers. For the folks that were trained back at home, District 3, those folks came back and did a very nice job of reaching out to all the states. Is there somewhere where you'd want a list of all the folks that were trained, at least on the federal side, to be case managers locally, or just so you have that list, or just kind of we're going to keep those locally and not worry about it?
If you have a list of people that were trained locally, and if you send it to me, then I will make sure it gets on EQS, and if they want to be deployed, because those people will be some of the first ones called. So if a Team Indigo is out there and they need case managers and they've already utilized everybody they have in the state, they're going to go to that list. So it's sort of up to your people whether they want to be known as a case manager that will deploy. I mean, if the outbreak gets too big, we're going to deploy them anyway. But
right.
If it's a small outbreak, there's usually enough people that want to go that we don't force anybody to do it.
Okay, I'll work through Dr. Wilson in District 3, and we'll get that figured out for how to get a list to you from District 2 for all the folks that were trained within our district, particularly, like you said, to get people that want to deploy outside the normal system. So I'll work with Dr. Wilson on that. Thank you. And that's Dr. Frank Wilson, our emergency lead in District 3. Don't want to put extra work on you, Royce.
That's all right. I knew who you were talking about.
I thought so, but I just want to clarify.
Do we have any additional written or verbal questions?
We have one additional verbal question. Caller, please go ahead.
Okay.
Yes, this is Delorious Leonard in South Carolina. I'd like to ask a couple of questions about the Field Reimbursement Specialist position. Number one, how long is the training and when is that typically done? Number two, is there a particular category of employee that is utilized as the Field Reimbursement Specialist? And C, I guess I need a little bit of clarity about whether or not that individual slot is utilized and deployed, or can that work be done virtually?
Wow, okay. Kim, you want to take that one? There's too many parts here.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks for the question. The Field Reimbursement Specialist team is already formed right now, and we're not accepting any other positions until we start to have either people drop off or we see a need, to implement more. I'm sorry, what was the second question? Again, please.
The second question was, how long is the training? I guess that may be a moot point since you're not accepting any more individual slots on the team. And can that work be done virtually versus an individual having to travel to X, Y, or Z location?
In certain situations, the position can be done virtually, but we want that initial contact with the producer to be in person so that they have a name and a face, and we have that relationship built with that producer so that they feel comfortable picking up the phone, calling us, and asking that question. So we have found that it is going to be important for us to actually deploy, for some period of time in order to create that relationship.
I'd like to go further. You indicated that you have all of the individuals in place for the field reimbursement groups for poultry. Will you be going out with a campaign for the same type positions when you do the other commodity groups? And when might you be doing that?
That I'm not sure on. I think right now we're looking at using the same reimbursement specialists for the other commodity groups, And the first commodity group that we are going to work with is the swine commodity group, and we're going to start working with them quickly.
Thank you.
The paperwork will probably remain about the same. The processes will be very similar. It'll just be different calculators that are used.
And there are no additional questions. Thank you.
So I have one question, one written question. How can you ask a question via a phone conference? So it's pound 2 to open your line, correct?
Yes, that is correct. So, Angela, if you can please go ahead and press pound 2 on your telephone keypad. Once again, Angela, if you could please go ahead and press pound 2 to enter the question queue. And I'm not seeing any hands raised at this time.
Yeah.
Oh, there we go. We just got it.
Okay.
Your line's been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi. I was a case manager during the Indiana outbreak in 2016, and I'm sorry I came on a little late, but I've been listening. I was curious as to, if I'm understanding this correct, that you'll be looking for case managers locally primarily through state officials and only VS if those state roles cannot be filled, and then the case managers would still potentially kind of rotate in every 3 weeks, if I'm hearing this correctly. And I guess it's a two-part question. Was there any negative feedback from producers or anyone as far as the case managers, how we handled that incident in 2016? Case managers basically had certain premises from start to finish, and basically like I had a premise over, several premises over 4 months. So I was just curious about that.
I have not heard any direct, issues with the 2016 Indiana situation. I was not deployed there, so I really can't speak to it, directly. I do know that producers like to have a single point of contact throughout the process if possible. And that's why I really feel like the more local assets, both veterinary services and state employees, that we can get trained up to be case managers, that will be more able to be in a position to possibly have them be a case manager for that producer all the way through. But if we get into the size and scope of an incident like we did with Minnesota and Iowa, where we had well over 200 prems involved, we're going to exhaust our local resources pretty rapidly. And then we're going to be relying on those case manager people to come in on 3-week rotations. So it'll probably be a combination of the two. And it kind of depends on where we're at during the outbreak. For instance, when we got toward the end of the Minnesota situation, we were able to roll a lot of that case management over to the local assets at the state level to finish walking those producers toward the end through the processes. Yes, ideally each producer would rather have one person to work with all the way through, and that's why we feel it's really important for that field reimbursement specialist on the financial side to be the one person that walks all the way through the process with them.
Thank you. Thank you.
There are no additional questions in the queue. We just had one person raise their hand. Caller, please go ahead. Your line's been unmuted.
Royce, Lewis Dodds again. So just to kind of follow up on what you were just saying, I know early on our first case manager trainings, there was discussion toward having, a consistency through case managers throughout the whole process. And so the thought was that even after their 3-week rotation, that toward the end of the liaison work, if you will, for those premises, they would continue to do that work in a virtual environment. Once they rotated back, as Nicki described earlier, after the initial work. A lot of her stuff was not so much on site. Is that discussion kind of changed now, and we're back to either local if preferred or if available, and then rotating and swapping back and forth? Thanks.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's going to be kind of situational. It's going to depend on the size and the scope of the outbreak. If they remain fairly small like they have for Indiana and the Tennessee, Alabama, chances are we'll be able to utilize more local personnel that could, be quote-unquote deployed longer than 3 weeks. But if we get into a giant blow-up like we did with Minnesota and Iowa, then I believe we're going to have to rely on that 3-week rotation and just have a day or two of overlap and hand the baton off from case manager to case manager, so to speak. We really feel like having that financial reimbursement specialist assigned to that producer all the way through is going to provide that level of consistency, especially on the financial side, that will really help those producers, in their comfort level, in knowing that they're going to get paid for their work, they're going to get paid for their birds, they're going to get paid for, the materials that they've had to dispose of. So we really feel that field reimbursement specialist is going to be that linchpin that carries everything all the way through, and it's going to be able to enable us to maybe go that 3-week rotation with case managers more efficiently. But yes, we would like to use local resources if we can, just for that consistency, and it's all just going to depend on the size and scope of the outbreak.
And there are no additional questions in the queue.
Okay, do we have any other written or verbal questions?
And it appears we have one more. Caller, please go ahead.
Hi, this is Lynn Tobias. I was employed as a case manager in Minnesota, and it was a major problem in my mind and in the producer's mind that we were handing off every 3 weeks. Has there been much possible conversation about using personnel from the companies, or is that totally impossible as case managers, at least be trained to help us in some way, because they're so vested, but they would be on site for the entire time, of course, and I understand that having someone available for the financial part of it is a great improvement. That would really help. But I still think that just getting to know the different parties, and by the time the 3 weeks is over, you just begin to really get a grasp of it. That was my impression during my time.
Are you speaking about an owner or a worker?
Well, I'm talking about someone within the integrated poultry companies. I mean, they could have people that are trained in our system as well. Maybe not that particular owner, but someone on a higher level, management level.
What system did you have in mind?
I'm not sure. I am just saying that it seems to me that this rotation that I was involved in was very difficult and really very frustrating to the owners and the growers. So I just think we need to do better on a local level. If that's reaching out to the integrated poultry system somehow, I'm not sure, but I think that's really still very important that we work on that.
I am really, really glad to hear you say that, because for the last 3 years, we've almost exclusively relied on the feedback from the owners and the premises to tell us what do we need to fix. And communication was always a big problem. So if we have these 3 key players that always know what's going on that premise, they have at least 3 people that they can reach and speak to. If they're on site, they can go to the site manager. And what we've got to do, and you just reminded me, is that it's a good idea if the site manager goes and introduces themselves to the owner and lets them know that they're there to help. And the same with the case manager. Of course, the case managers and the finance people definitely go speak to him, but not always the site manager. So that might be something that we need to think about, Dr. Wilson, incorporating into our site manager training to somehow for the site managers to let the owners know who they are. And if there's a problem on site, a problem to do with maybe the clean, dirty line or disinfection, trucks rolling in and out, something along those lines, they can take it up with the site manager, and the site manager knows to call the ops chief and go from there and start getting things fixed. Does that sound workable to you?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Good.
I'm sorry, I think we're kind of losing you.
Oh, sorry.
Well, absolutely. I would expect, the owner and the site manager, to have conversations, especially about, biosecurity issues. That's primarily why the site manager is there during, times when operations are going on the property. They're going to be that biosecurity officer. And yes, I would expect the site manager to occasionally visit with the owner or the grower and discuss, biosecurity issues or, trucks coming in and out and how all that needs to happen effectively and as well as other things. And, it's kind of a dual role between the case manager and site manager to help, walk that producer through the processes. So, yes, I would expect there to be some level of communication there.
I don't know how we could incorporate individual workers because of liability issues. So the best we're going to be able to do to provide as many well-trained people on site as we can possibly do and make sure that they understand that communication with that owner is going to be key and those workers.
And we have no additional questions in the queue at this time.
Thank you for your help. I need to get on another call.
Okay. Do we have any other written questions or verbal questions?
There are no additional questions at this time.
All right. So as Liz Clark, I'd like to thank everyone again for joining us today. We have another webinar scheduled on February 6th at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Niche Producers Working Group update. I'll be sending out additional webinar updates in the next few weeks, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. The event has now concluded. You may disconnect.